Typically, at this time of year, what kind of a sermon do we have? An Easter sermon, a Passover sermon, something like that. This is going to be a little different because I'm going to be talking to you about a man who affected me a lot. His name is Roger Morneau. I'll tell you a little more about him. He's written a lot of books, fantastic books that tell you how to get in touch with the real God through real prayer. It's not the kind of prayer where you repetition and try to think, what are you going to say next? Let's see, I already did the missionaries. I already did my friends type of thing, Real prayer. He affected me. I'm going to be telling you about that. But his top chapter in the whole Bible is a chapter he calls the power chapter. It has very much to do with this time of season. And what chapter do you think that might be? Those of you who know Roger Morneau might know. Matthew 27. And it's the chapter that talks about Jesus' death. And he says, and of course he's right, it's because of what Jesus did for us. It's because of what that chapter says that we can get in touch with unlimited power. The power that he offers us, the grace that he offers us because of what he did for us, is power that had never been seen to that extent before. When he said, "It is finished," we entered a new era. And we're living in it still. And we need to remember that. Did you know, sometimes in the past when I've had a sermon at this time of year, I have just read Matthew 27. Just read it. It's powerful. And then when you stop and point out a few things within that chapter, there's just no end. We're going to be studying what Jesus did for us throughout eternity. I don't understand it. It's beyond my ability to comprehend. Linda and I were talking about that this week, and why someone had to die and give their life for us and be handed over to Satan. That's what happened to Jesus. And he said those words, my God, why have you forsaken me? Was he quoting scripture? Because it was predicted of him in Psalms 27, or Psalms 22, he said those words, and while he was hanging on the cross, he looked down and saw other words that are in that psalm being fulfilled, like parting my garments, in front of him while he hung on the cross. And then he felt that separation from God that we never have to feel, ever. He had it for us. As Linda and I were talking about it, I said, I don't really understand it, but one thing I do know, this controversy is much bigger than us. And Satan understands it. And because he understands it, I get a chance for eternal life. And I'll be studying the rest of it along with you, hopefully, all together, even beyond this world. Right, Yvonne? In chapter 27, this is still my introduction. We got to pull Easter in here, right? In chapter 27, I'm just going to throw this out there. You may find this interesting, and before the season's finished, you might want to go and read this. When Jesus died, some fantastic things happened. The universe sort of let loose. There was an earthquake. There was things happened so great, the dark part of that day, unusual. The clouds rolled in. There was this mighty earthquake. They heard Jesus say, "It is finished," triumphantly with a loud voice. Never had they seen a man die with a loud voice like that before. Fantastic stuff. The Bible says his body never decayed. That was predicted of him. All other bodies decay. It said this man will not see decay. Fascinating stuff. The centurion standing there, who had seen lots of people die, said, "Surely this was the Son of God." And did you know that at that moment when the earthquake hit, multiple graves were opened? You've read that part? You read that those people came out and testified to the people in the city, those dead people, and that now they're in heaven because they were the first fruits of Jesus conquering sin. The first fruits. Well, if they're the first fruits, who do you think is the second fruits? You and me, if we choose to be in it. But there's more. If you read carefully, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I think you're going to find out, I think you will find that those people at that moment of the earthquake, they didn't come to life. The graves opened. It was a scene of destruction and chaos at the same time the greatest event in the world had taken place. But according to prophecy, and the whole system that the Jewish people did in their ceremonies was a prophecy. At one time you have this, at another time you have this. They had been doing sacrifices throughout their history. And when Passover came, there was a preparation, there was the Passover, and then there was unleavened bread representing Jesus again. And then there was the first fruit ceremony 3 days later, the first fruit ceremony, this wave sheaf offering. And Paul tells us that first fruits was Jesus. But he took trophies with him, first fruits from the grave. Now, Jesus didn't rise until the 3-day period of the Passover was up. That's when those dead people came to life. Is that a new thought to you? When I found that out, I thought, that is crazy. If you don't believe me, read it carefully in several versions, especially the King James Version, when it says they actually came to life, and then read Desire of Ages. Fantastic story. Okay, so we've got all power because of what Jesus did for us. Roger Morneau is a man that experienced that power, and his power chapter, the chapter that he memorized, at least portions of that chapter, he didn't start his day out without quoting for himself as he started the day to remind himself of what's available to us and to him because of what Jesus did in Matthew 27. That's his power chapter. Now, the last time I was here, if you recall, we just read Bible stories, word for word. And they're exciting. They're fantastic stories. And we read about a man of little faith, but the subject really was about faith and what it is. And then we looked at people in the Bible who had faith. Some who didn't start out with much, like Peter and John. But they were the people then. Peter and John were the ones, you remember in the Bible story that we read, that brought a paralytic man back to health. And he'd been paralyzed all his life. You remember that story? And I pointed out that in the story, they didn't pray first. They just said, we offer you what we have in the name of Jesus Christ, stand up and walk. And then we discussed, how come we don't do things like that? None of us go to the hospital and say, rise and walk. And by the way, why didn't they pray? And then I told you a real life story about a girl who was baptized in the Jordan River in Israel. And our son, my wife and I, our son is a pastor, and he just came back from a tour to Israel. But when these people were on a tour, there was a woman that got baptized in the Jordan River, and she commanded the Jordan River to part because she had faith. You remember that story? I suggested, just so I don't want to leave too much suspense here, that the reason Peter and John didn't pray first, none of us would dream of doing that, was because they had already done their praying. They were so in touch with Jesus and his power that they knew their mission for that day. And when they saw the paralyzed man, they didn't need to pray again. They simply need to say, in the name of Jesus, who we're in contact with, rise up and walk. I was just reading Acts again this week, and I found out that Peter did that with another paralyzed man. I guess I've read this story before, but it just hit me. Wow. Jesus raised a paralyzed man and made a big situation. I think it was on the Sabbath. Peter and John did it not once but twice, and Jesus had told them, you're going to have power to do these things. In fact, I think he said, greater than things than these will you do. Didn't he say that? I told you last time, too, about a man who has affected me by the name of Pavel Goya. And when I leave today, I'm going to leave a website that some of us in Crescent have been involved with that is inviting groups to come together and learn to pray with Pavel guiding in a way that you might not have done before. In a way that uses the Bible promises for real. Dear Father in heaven, Jesus our Lord, you said this in your word, and we're claiming this today. And it might be, we're experimenting, some of us in Creston, to see what happens. This morning, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience prior to coming to Creston, where you may have things happen that you have never had happen before. And you'll realize we've talked about it. We've heard other people's stories. Now it's our story. God in heaven, and this Jesus who died for us on that day long ago, he's real and he does have all power. So I'm going to start with our scripture text this morning and give you a few texts, and then I'm going to tell you some of my story. So our scripture text this morning, and by the way, Marilyn was telling me this morning, and I had seen it actually. I went online and seen this. Marilyn had a sermon about the great faith, 2 men of great faith in the Bible. Isn't that right, Marilyn? The one man of great faith? The Roman centurion. And my text talks about a man of little faith. At least we refer to him that way. In actual fact, I don't think his faith was that small. He had come to the disciples with enough faith to bring a son. He had heard the stories. They couldn't help him. He was pretty discouraged. And then he used that word. Well, let's just read the verse. It's found in Mark chapter, chapter 9. And starting with verse 19 is what I'm going to read. This man had brought a boy that was demon-possessed. It had been for a long, long time. There was no help for him. The disciples couldn't help, even though they had been casting out demons and doing miracles because Jesus had given them power to do that. But this time, they were not successful. This man had enough faith to come, and that's enough faith to do some mighty things. Don't ever forget that. Just come to Jesus. No matter what you've done, no matter who you are, there's no record of Jesus ever turning anyone away. Anyway, his faith may have been decreasing just a little because there was no help for him. And this is where he comes to Jesus, and this is the story. It says, "O unbelieving generation, how long shall I stay with you, and how long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So they brought him, and when the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has it been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." And by the way, I'm reading from the New International Version. If you can, Jesus said. No matter what version you have, that's the idea. The man said, "If you can help me, please help me." "Everything is possible for him who believes," Jesus said. Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case of many of us. It certainly has been my experience. And I expect, even though I've had an awful lot of fascinating things happen, and I have grown, I expect that it's very possible that there's an awful lot of growth needing yet, because I still get fearful sometimes. And I can't imagine myself being in Peter's place. We read this story last time, in prison, just waiting to be executed the next day and having a sound sleep where an angel has to come and wake you up. But these are the kind of growth experiences we have when we get to know the living God. John 17, 1-3 was Jesus' prayer for his disciples, and we are amongst those. Jesus said in John 17, 1-3, and the whole chapter is his prayer, But it says he looked toward heaven and prayed, Father, the time has come. Glorify your Son, that your Son may glorify you. For you granted him authority over all people, that he might give eternal life to all those you have given him. Now, this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. Jesus' great theme in all of his ministry was that we might know him and the Father who sent him. And he even told parables. He even told stories about people who had grown up in the church, who when the critical time came, didn't know him. People sometimes who even had worked miracles for him. You remember the story where they said, haven't we done miracles in your name and done mighty things? And Jesus said, I didn't know you. And remember the story of the virgins who were waiting for the wedding? And they were all church people. Some of them had a little more oil, but some of them, when they went back to the wedding, he said, I don't know you. We want to make sure that we know the living God and take advantage of that power he has for us. 2 Chronicles 7:14, I think this is probably the greatest example prayer of how we should pray. Of course, Jesus showed us the general way to pray, that we should always pray with the Lord's Prayer. But this prayer gives us clues as to what kind of a heart condition we can have. And the story that goes with it, Solomon's story, is just fantastic. And God honored Solomon in a way with the dedication of the temple at this time where nobody could go in and minister in the temple. God's glory was there. And they had to wait until it was able that humans could go in to that place. But 2 Chronicles 7:14, and you can remember this text, it's in 2 Chronicles 7, and add 7, you get 14, and it's also verse 14. 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. We certainly need that, don't we? Our land includes everything starting with this to expanding territory. And I'll bet you that there's people in Ukraine praying this very prayer with a kind of desperation, the kind of desperation that brings results. I just want to, before I forget though, I just want to point out that Roger Morneau and Pavel Goya are known in our church not only as prayer warriors, but as intercessory prayer warriors. In the Bible, Samuel was known as an intercessory prayer warrior. And there's another man that's especially known for the intercessory prayer. Who is it? But the point of it is this: when we know the real God, when we claim these promises, that's where the power is. The power is in his word. And when we remind God of those promises, he delights in us knowing his word and reminding him of it. That's when we experience the real power. And the knowing, the real knowing of the God in heaven. Jeremiah 9, and I shared some of these texts with you the last time I was here. Jeremiah 9:23 and 24 says, and I think I said there might be a case when it's okay to boast, to brag. Here it is. Let not the wise man boast of his wisdom, or the strong man boast of his strength, or the rich man boast of his riches. But let him who boasts boast about this, that he understands and knows me, that I am the Lord who exercises kindness, justice, and righteousness on earth. For in these I delight, declares the Lord. And the last one, I mean, we could go forever on just texts. But the last one I want to share with you today is something God has always wanted to do, and it's sort of a mystery, but when you experience it, you have an idea of what he's talking about. Colossians 1:27 says, "To them God has chosen to make known among the Gentiles the glorious riches of this mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory." And we're talking about something real. Pretty hard to explain. Jesus explained the power of God, the Holy Spirit. He said, if you see the wind blowing, and by the way, we had enough wind blowing at our place to blow down, I think it was 10 big trees. And we've been cutting firewood ever since. I've been telling Linda, this is over $1,000 worth of lumber, logs. And here we are cutting up for firewood. You can see the Holy Spirit work. We see it in these stories in the Bible. We see it in Roger Morneau and Pavel Goya's stories. But I also know that some of you, because I have been on your church website and I've heard your stories, God has been working in your life too, in a big way, a real way. And I think we can have more of that. So that is the introduction. Let me tell you just a little bit of my story, because it's happened way back, and I've had many things happen since then. And it sort of goes like this. I read Roger Morneau. He writes a book called Trip into the Supernatural. It's a story that's so fantastic. He originally in Eastern Canada, before he was a Seventh-day Adventist, got involved with a group of high-rank people who literally served Satan and gained great wealth because of it. And just before he was to be initiated forever, he came in contact with a new Seventh-day Adventist who was sharing with him what he was just learning, and it saved his life, literally. This is a book that is so real, it actually frightens some people. And in fact, I know Adventists who are frightened to read this book. But it's not that kind of a book. It's a book talks about the real God, the real Satan, and the real promises and power of God that can deliver and save. I have sometimes shared this book with people who were atheists, said there's no such thing, no God, to get them hopefully to open their eyes. And anyway, that's the first book that puts him on a path to knowing God for real. And then he wrote some books called Incredible Answers to Prayer, More Incredible Answers to Prayer, When You Need Incredible Answers to Prayer, and they are incredible. So when I read these books, I've titled the story A Man of Little Faith, and I'm not talking about the man that came to Jesus with his son. I'm talking about myself. Roger Morneau had so many stories that I questioned, could these stories be true? But I started putting some of his principles into practice and reading my Bible in a new way and claiming Bible promises. And Linda and I both did that. And both of us saw some things happen that are just phenomenal. So most of you know that I've been a commercial fisherman. And I had a fellow working for me on the boat. And I shared these books with him. He had an association with Adventists in the past. He had gone to an Adventist school, but he wouldn't have called himself an Adventist and he's not baptized. And I shared the books with him. He, much more forcefully than me, gave these books back to me, and he said, Murray, I'm going to be honest with you. He said, I don't believe it. These things don't happen. They just do not happen. There's too many of these stories. And I need to tell you that Roger Morneau is a man that's known around the world, at least in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, as a man not only of prayer, but as an intercessory prayer warrior who gets results for people. He had a prayer list. I think I just saw a video recently, 2,000 people on his prayer list, and then it increased. But I remember him saying at one point that he had a prayer list of 40,000 people. Now you know that it's impossible to actually carry on a prayer list of 40,000 people. So he said what he was doing is he was passing on these names to the great high priest in heaven. Remember the high priest in the temple times, in the Old Testament times? Where did he carry the people on his, remember that breastplate? It had the names of all the leaders of the tribes. Who's our great high priest now? He's got our name. He's got your name. And so Roger would get the request. He would look the request over, and he would pass it on to the great high priest. Roger Morneau had a heart condition, and he thanked God that he had all day sometimes to do nothing but pray. Quite a man. So Ron said to me, and I looked at my prayer journal recently, and let me, if I haven't told you this before, let me say it now. It doesn't matter whether you're a Pathfinder Junior or whether you're an old person or in between, keep a prayer journal. Because when God does things for you, you want to go back to it. You want to see the date. You want to see what happened. Because human nature, what it is, if something fantastic happens, we do one of two things. As time goes on, we expand the story or we leave out important details. So just recently, I went back to my prayer journal, and I'm going to tell you the dates because they're significant to me now. They weren't then. So, in the summer of 1999, I shared these books with my friend Ron. He gave them back to me and said, I don't believe it. Don't believe a word of it. I said, Ron, I understand. I don't blame you. I've read these stories. I would have agreed with you, except that my life is having some of these same things happen to me. Okay. The summer fishing season was over. Ron was a long-haul truck driver. That's what his dad did. And he bought a truck with his dad, and they both went trucking through the United States, and they wound up at a truck stop in Arizona. There was another trucker. They were sitting at the table eating and watching TV, and somewhere in the conversation, Ron mentioned to this other truck driver about this guy named Roger Morneau. It must have been something on the news flash that got his attention. Now remember, this other trucker could have been from anywhere in the United States. But he turned to Ron and said, I know Roger. I attend his church. And everyone knows that when Ron prays, things happen. So when Ron came back from his truck trip, he told me the story. And I said, Ron, do you think that just happened? He said, I've been thinking about that. Could I have those books back again? He wanted to share them with his wife. That was in the fall of 99. So the next spring, in March of 2000, for fishermen, March of 2000, March is when the herring season begins. The salmon season is the beginning of July through October, pretty much. A little give and take there. Different species of salmon run different times. But the herring fishing is in March. And as you go up the coast, generally, the season progresses. It's like when the birds come south, or when the birds come to the swallows have shown up, but we know, Linda and I, although the last one to show up at our feeder is going to be the black-headed grosbeaks. They're going to come. They haven't come yet. And you know, the swallows arrive in Capistrano at the same time every year. It's fantastic. The herring do the same thing. They spawn at certain locations at a certain time of year. So, in the spring of 2000, after the experience that I just told you, Ron and I went to the west coast of Vancouver Island to a little place called Zabalas, which at one time it is now, but at one time it was a little gold mining community. But it's right on the coast. You also have access to the ocean, and we would tie up our boats there as we were waiting for that time when the herring spawn. Because it's when they spawn that the roe is harvested, because it's a delicacy in Japan. That's what we were there for. On this particular occasion, the herring took longer than usual to spawn. In fact, at the time, we were told this is only the second time in history that this has happened. They're not doing their normal timing thing. It would be like the swallows don't show up until summertime type of thing. So the fishermen panicked because most of us were licensed for different areas. We knew that in March 7, my birthday, so I can remember when this happened, March 7 is when they're hearing we need to be here in Zabelis. And a little later in March, we need to go further north. And towards the end of March, we need to be up in Prince Rupert. Prince Rupert, the fish were getting ready to spawn. In fact, it was being announced, the fisheries department was announcing it's imminent that it's going to be a very possible opening soon. So licensed in 2 areas, tens of thousands, some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in this fishery. So the fellows that I was fishing with, and they owned the license in this case, I wasn't licensed for herring, I was licensed for salmon, my boat, panicked. And they said, we've got to break up. Some of us got to go to north. Some of us have to stay here. It was decided that Ron and I would go north. Other fishermen were in the same predicament, and they didn't all have boats, big boats that would take them in their crews and their smaller vessels traveling. So some guys asked if they could jump on with us. We said, okay, let's go. So along the way, one of these guys, he was a young fellow named Steve, 20 years old, and he caught a ride with us. Now, just prior to our leaving Zabelis, we'd gone up to the local hotel, which is a historic hotel from the gold mining days, and we'd had an evening meal there. It was March 7, I'll tell you how I know. And the waitress that served us, and she was just chit-chatting as she took our orders, etc. She said, by the way, did you know this hotel is haunted? And she said, there's a woman that lived in the gold mining days. She worked in the laundry of the hotel. And I have worked in the laundry, and Susie will come and throw the laundry all around. And there's nobody there, but we know that it's Susie doing it. And she said sometimes doors will open and close of their own accord, and the TV will turn on and off of its own accord and blast. And I was curious, and I'm a little skeptical, as you know, and I wanted to know where I could get more information. She said, well, you can check with the owner of the hotel. She said, you'll recognize him. He looks like a biker, and he's got a big, long, full beard down. And so the next day, I went looking around, and I did find him. And he was doing some paperwork, and I asked about the story. He didn't even look up from what he was doing. He just kept always doing. He says, I don't believe in ghosts. And I said, well, I do, and I've had some experience with it, in fact. Those of you who read my book know that when I was a boy, I was nearly suffocated to death by an evil spirit. And it's because of Jesus that I'm here today. And then when he found out that I was a believer, he just kept on doing what he was doing. He said, go push that door. And it was a little door, you know, when you have a bar section, you may have a counter, and then you have one of these little doors that they push in and out as they're going and getting the orders. So he said, go and push that door. And so I did. And the door was a door that had swung for so many years that the hinges were worn out, and it had worn the carpet. So that when it swung, there was this big carpet worn away. So you either had to push it hard, or you would lift the door a little bit, because it was just one of these halfway doors. You would lift the door and open it and do it like that. And he didn't tell me why he'd asked me to do it. And here he is, still looking at his stuff. He didn't, not even making eye contact. And he says, it's hard to open, isn't it? I said, yeah. And then he said, there's 2 of them. He said, when this place is really hopping, that door is swinging back and forth all by itself. There's 2 spirits, but he said they're perfectly harmless. And he didn't offer to carry on the conversation. So I said, thank you. I think I said thank you. I don't even know if I said goodbye. He wasn't talking to me, so I left. Now, 20-year-old Steve winds up on our boat. He knows that we don't fish on Sabbath. Well, a herring might spawn on Sabbath. And if they do, we miss out. So this was a mad scramble where fishermen are saying, okay, part of our crew's there, part of our crew's here, we need to team up a little bit. But how can they team up with us if we're not going to fish on Sabbath? I mean, that's a bad business arrangement, right? Anyway, he started asking questions and talking to Ron. the unbeliever. And Ron tells him about Roger Morneau. And Steve, this 20-year-old Steve, his mouth falls open and he says, "It's not by chance that I'm on this boat. Before I came out fishing," he said, I was not happy with life. And I said to my mom, is this it? Is this all there is?" And she said, "Well, you could pray to God. And if you're serious," she said, "something will happen." And as far as I know, I've met Steve's parents since this story. I don't know that they're religious people. In fact, Steve said the only religious person he knew that had faith like ours was his grandmother. And so he said, "I've been praying. And here I am sitting. I've been waiting for weeks for the herring to spawn. Nothing is happening. And I meet you guys." He said, "This is not by chance." Ron, I was actually in my bunk resting, and I was straining to hear portions of this conversation. Ron came down to his bunk and got this little book called The Incredible Power of Prayer by Roger Morneau. And it's a few stories of Roger's from the other books, and these stories are no doctrine. It's just stories about the incredible power of God with many Bible verses and how your life can be impacted. Ron took the book and gave it to him. And then he said, "You need to talk to Murray." So we got talking, and Steve shared the story that I just shared with you. That was in March of 2000. At the close of herring season, we came home. I got to tell you this. The waitress who served us, as she told us the story about the hotel being haunted, she also shared that she and her kids were very interested in near-death experiences and life after death and reincarnation. In fact, she believed that she was reincarnated. And I told you I wouldn't forget this, because it was on March 7 when all of this happened, which just happened to be my birthday. And I'll tell you a little more about this as I've got to quickly continue on here. So I wanted to share some things with the waitress that would help her understand what was really going on. So I got some good material on what happens when you die type of thing, and I tried to share it with her, and I couldn't. She just got so excited. And she would talk in ways that just completely was out there somewhere. And so I decided the time's not right. I took the material on the boat, and Steve was ready. He was ready for everything. I gave it to him. When I came home from herring fishing, I shared this story with my Sabbath school class that I was attending. And I said, "I have a real strange prayer request. It's the kind of prayer that Roger Morneau does." I said, I told him the story about Steve and the waitress. I said, "I don't know the name of the waitress. I don't know where she lives. I know that she was transient in Zabellas when we were there. I know that she worked as a waitress, and she also worked on the boats. She was also pretty rough. She could hold her own with any of the guys. I would like to meet her again. And would you pray with me that when the time is right, because it wasn't when I was there, that I will meet her?" That's a pretty strange prayer. And it was a long time later that one day I was coming back from Campbell River, which is about 3 hours south of Port Hardy where we lived. And on the spur of the moment, I decided I'm going to go into Zabellas and see if I can find this waitress. It was raining, as only the West Coast can rain. You have to go an hour in on a logging road, so it's muddy, etc., etc. I'm looking for a woman I don't know. It was getting dark and raining. And as I was driving along, I prayed, and I said, I began to have second thoughts. And I said, "Lord, I feel sort of silly. I don't know why I'm doing this." It wasn't like I had some God telling me, "Go today, this is your moment" type of thing. I just decided I was going to go. So I talked to God about it. I said, "I don't know why I'm doing this. I feel silly. I'm an hour in and an hour out at night on a muddy, rainy road, and I don't know the name of the person I'm looking for or whether she's even still there." I got to Zabellas. I went to the hotel. Sign in the window said closed. It's raining. So I drive around the town just in case God might arrange that I have this meeting, nobody. Come back to the hotel, and I'm thinking, I'll knock on the door and get their attention because it was still closed, but I could see some people inside. And I'll tell them, I'll describe who I'm looking for, and maybe something will happen. So I offered up a little prayer, opened my eyes. That sign had been changed. It was now open. And to this day, I don't know if I just happened to come at that time, whether somebody changed it. I'm just telling you what happened. So I went in. I was getting ready to tell them about the lady I was looking for when there was one person sitting at a table who was one of the workers having her lunch. And I looked, and it was the woman I was looking for. And she looked at me and she said, "Murray." I didn't know her name. I said, "How do you know my name?" And she said, "Because when you were here, it was your birthday, and the guys wanted to embarrass you, and they told me, the waitress, to go and get a piece of cake and come out and in front of everybody sing happy birthday." So she knew my name. I said, "What's your name?" She said, "My name is Ziggy." "And why are you here?" So here's people standing around all waiting for the answer. And I said, my heart's going like this. This is sort of new stuff for me. At that time, I can't say it's changed an awful lot, but I'm not used to cold turkey telling people about my faith and my Jesus and etc. God arranges it. And so I said, I came here specifically to try and find you. And I wanted to finish the conversation that we had. And I said, I've got some things here to share with you about what happens when you die. And I had a little steps to Christ. And I said, I'm giving you my phone number. If you ever want to call, I'm available. And this time she said, "Thank you. I will read it on my way out of Zabalas tomorrow. All my goods have been moved. I'm just waiting for my ride." And she told me that where she was going, I think, was a camp somewhere, and there wouldn't have been any phone connection. It was my last opportunity to talk to her. I went back to my Sabbath school class and told them the story, and I'm pretty hyped up, and you know how it is. I don't know, maybe they even questioned the story. These people smiled and got back to the lesson. So that was in April of 2000. In May 19 of 2002, I shared that same story that I just told you again in prayer meeting in my church, a little group of people. And I had to be careful, and my wife had told me, "You've shared," I'm pretty pumped up. "You shared this story several times, you can't keep telling the same story over and over." And, but some of us do need to tell it. Maybe not to the same people, but I shared the story again at prayer meeting. And this time a man said, "That's amazing." He said, "I was there when you made that request, and I wondered ever since what happened." He was a visitor, and he wasn't a church member. He became a church member, but for 2 years he had been waiting to see what happened to my request. And it so happened that when I shared the answer, he hadn't been there. 2 years. January 3, 2004, 2 years later again, I was visiting another church. I shared the same story at potluck after church, and there was a man sitting there, and I thought everybody knew him. I was the odd one out, and I saw this man's face go white, literally. And he said, "I know Ziggy. I have worked at that hotel. It is haunted." And when we left, I said, "Who was that man?" And they said, "We don't know. He was visiting." November 2004, this is my last story, it's time to quit. I was still putting some of these principles into practice. Time has gone on. I've got involved with a prayer group where we're trying to do some of these same things as a prayer group now. And on one day, I said, "Lord, I'm scared, but I've asked you to cleanse my heart, and now I'm saying you can send me anywhere you want and do anything you want with me. But please be gentle." And we were sharing in this group what our impressions were, and what we thought God might be telling us, and not saying, "No, you have to do this," just encouragement, and then you come back and make a report, good or bad. Well, next day I got a call to come down and have week of prayer meeting at actually Fraser Valley, and I said, "No, I had in my mind what it was God was going to do, and it wasn't that. Linda came home and she said, Murray, you just prayed about this last night. Okay, fast forward. This happened 4 times before a year was out. In every case, in just about every case, it was their speaker had fallen through and it was an emergency. So I was asked to go to another school. I shared the same stories I shared with you. No, I'll tell you this first. As I was telling my experience and as I was sharing about the real power of God, a teacher of the class told me, and he didn't care who was listening, this is in a Seventh-day Adventist school, he said, we know that there was no worldwide flood. We know that the creation story is not completely accurate, and it didn't all, and the creation story didn't happen in 7 literal days. We know that many of the mission stories are not so. And then he said, and I have to tell you this, I had bought this book the previous day. We came to the end of the series, and it was my intention to pass this book out to the students. I had them in my satchel, but I had said nothing about Roger Morneau yet. The teacher said, there's this guy. I can't remember his name. He writes these answer to prayer books, and he exaggerates, and he tells lies, and you know the stories aren't true. And my mouth fell open. I said, do you mean Roger Morneau? Yeah, he said, that's the guy. And I went home, and I said to Linda, what are we going to do? This is confrontational. And as I prayed about it, I thought and said to Linda, I'm not changing anything. I'm doing just what I was going to do. So, with the student sitting here and the teacher at the back, I could see him, I told the stories I just told you and more. And then I said, anybody who doesn't believe these stories is somebody who hasn't experienced it for themselves. Maybe another time I will tell you more. But that's where I've got to stop because it is time. I have 30 of these books at the back. What I did with the kids, I said, I don't have enough books for everybody. Take one of these books, read it, but you have to pass it on. There's 30 back there. Any of you, take it, read it, but pass it on, okay? And then, if you go on my website, or if you tell this church, maybe share what happened. Might be exciting. Our closing song is number, I don't have it written down. 3.
No, that's the one. No, Take My Life.
It's the one that,
Oh, geez.
it's the one that you guys have been practicing. And I'll just sit down here and then we'll have closing prayer.
Not a
your soul. Take myself and I will be ever only all for thee.
Thanks so much, and what a way to end. Let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, I do ask that you take my life and that you take the lives of each person here today and draw them to you and help them to be so drawn to you that other people can see it. All of us, we ask for that power. We are thankful for that power. And today, especially as we think about the Passover season, we remember what Jesus did for us, and we come to you with thankful hearts for the lives that can be ours now and the lives that can be us in the future. In Jesus' name, amen.
Are you looking for answers in these unprecedented times? Are you wondering what the future holds? Maybe you just need a church family to be a part of, or maybe you need prayer for something that's going on in your own personal life. Come join us every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. in our journey as we search the scriptures and learn and understand what God says in His Word for us and our lives now and in the future. If you're unable to make it in person, watch one of our sermons on YouTube or Facebook. God bless as we await the soon coming of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.